And let's post that. See.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first episode of The Officer's Mess, which is a series that's going to be ongoing on my channel where myself and Henry West, who's the very well-dressed gentleman on the screen beside me.
Hello there. How you doing?
Are going to be watching. We're going to be discussing various films and TV programs around sort of British military, war films and British military history over the coming, for as long as we can go for. And in the foreseeable future, we're going to be reviewing the TV show Sharpe. And in this episode in particular, we're going to be reviewing Sharpe rifles. But before we continue, and to give people a bit of time to get into the chat and to get watching, I'm going to play us some music, which is suitable for this particular episode. So just about a second, just put it on stage and.
Now the drums beat up again.
There we
For
go.
all good
Soldier, gentlemen.
Then let us list and march, I say,
Over the hills and far away.
Over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. The King commands and we'll obey. Over the hills and far away.
And that Over the Hills and Far Away. I should say that particular video is from a channel called the Patriotic Archive, which is a wonderful source for British military music and British sort of patriotic and folk music. I happen to know the gentleman who runs it, and he is more than happy, as long as you ask him, to let you use his videos using music on your channel, just as long as you ask his permission. So it's I would recommend people go and subscribe. Now, at this point, before we go any further, I will just actually introduce Henry to those who are watching or on my channel who may not have seen Henry before. Henry is a former British soldier. He's a Twitch streamer, a YouTuber, and more recently, with great success, a TikToker. And more recently, and less happily, a much abused victim of YouTube's utterly vile anti-bugle prejudice.
It's outrageous, honestly. These bastards flagged me for hate speech on YouTube for the simple crime of blowing a bugle. It's outrageous.
Yeah, I genuinely, I'd say I couldn't believe it, but it's YouTube, so I can believe they do it. It's just so seems absurd.
It's okay because they are getting a letter challenging them for a duel regarding this particular matter, and it will arrive in due stead, and I will have my blood to satisfy my honour.
And I should say that Henry, on Twitch particularly, streamed a lot of games like Holdfast. You recently did one, I forgot the name of it now. The World War. Yes. Which when you did that stream, I was surprised when you said that was done by just 4 people, because that's really good.
It's a phenomenal game. I'd recommend everyone go and wishlist it on Steam.
Yeah.
Hello, gentlemen in chat.
Yeah. Oh, let me just say that. I take it these. I don't recognise these names, so I'll take it these are from your site, Henry.
They could very well be from my side. Yeah, I know them well. They're from the first RM, actually.
Oh, right. Hello, Lucas.
Well, they're good fellows.
Yeah,
well, fellow and lady, but
yeah. And I should say that you can find in the description the links to all Henry's social media, presence. So you've got his YouTube channel, Twitch, TikTok, and also his X account, all of which I would recommend you to follow, especially his YouTube channel, because there are many very good clips and shorts there, which give you a very good sense of both Henry's personality and the good sense about the First Royal Marines and the other people that Henry plays with.
You truly are too kind, old boy. And for any of my audience, make sure to give Aaron a good old follow. A good old, no, it's not follow on YouTube, it's subscribe. One of the most, shall we say, cogent booktubers that I think I've met in recent times.
Oh, thank you.
Especially with a, shall we say, rather particularly certain inclined dominating culture in booktube. And I'll say no more to avoid YouTube striking.
Yeah, no, I not to go into too much detail, but this month I made 2 community posts which sort of made my views plain on that issue, and I don't think we made any friends, but I don't think I lost too many friends either. So,
well, that's the important part, isn't it? You know, drain the swamp and whatnot, all that good old sentiment.
I'll just go through a couple of the comments. So, and this chap Baldwin is one of my subscribers. Who's been in my account.
Baldwin the second. Well, good to see.
And I suspect by the name this might be one of yours, Henry.
It's quite possible. It's quite possible.
So since we've got 7 people watching, I think we might as well start on sort of into the episode proper. So, as I said, that we're going to be reviewing Sharpe Rifles first, which is the first episode or first film, depending on whether you regard the Sharpe's TV series as TV films or a TV series. So, just to start with, when did you first watch this Sharpe series as a whole, Henry?
Oh, goodness me, that's pushing me back a bit. For the dawn of a new era, the year was 1796. No, I think I must have watched Sharpe first, probably when I was a boy, around 10 years old, roughly speaking. As you can possibly imagine, it very much came to dominate a few of my interests, as you might well see.
At this point, I should just also point out that Henry does stream like this very often. He won't always be in this particular uniform, but it will be in a variety of uniforms.
Give and take. But, yes. What about yourself? When did you first start watching?
I think I was slightly bit younger than you, because I have a very clear image of the scene in, I think it's Sharpe's Regiment, where Harper and Sharpe in the pub, and Harper recounting how they took the eagle at Talavera, and that's my first memory of Sharpe, and that would have been in the very late 90s when he had just finished his original run, and then they were replaying it on I think it was a Sunday afternoon, something like that. So that's the first time I ever saw it. And then what happened was, a few years later, my childhood, I spent a great deal of time with my paternal grandmothers, and she had I can't remember whether it was Sky or Virgin or something, and they had what was then called UK Gold, and every Sunday night they'd replay the Sharpe series. So she'd record it for me on Sunday night, and then the following Friday when I came over, I'd watch it. And so I ended up watching the whole thing through. So that sort of really got me into it. And I don't remember if I saw the TV show first. It's a full episode, or the books first, or read the first book. Because I do remember I did actually read Sharpe Rifles, the first Sharpe book I read, which is unusual for me. Usually with me, I end up reading a book about 4 or 5 into it and going back and then restarting it, which is so. Yeah, I know. I know you said you had read the books. Was that after you'd seen the TV series, or
I think it must have been. I mean, being a wee whippersnapper and such, as one tends, you tend to gain an appreciation for the literature after the big flashy music numbers and the gunfire and all of that sort of thing. So I think my interest peaked a bit later when I got a tad more into reading. And I think it must have been possibly 15 when I first read Sharpe's Rifles. Well, I tell you what, the one thing that caught me with Sharpe's Rifles was, or reading the book, the difference in the described accent between Sean Bean and Richard Sharpe.
Yeah, what's funny about that is the reason why the accent, the accent in the book does actually change after Sharpe's Rifles, after the TV show, because Sean Bean became so associated with it. When it comes to this sort of India books, Sharpe's Tiger, Sharpe Triumph, Sharpe Fortress, Bernacle rewrites his backstory slightly. So he's born in London, but then he has to escape and goes up to Yorkshire for joining the 33rd. Which
nice retconning there. Well done.
Which interestingly is on a side point exactly what happened with James Bond. When Sean Connery got passed, Ian Fleming went back in the next book, which I think was You Only Live Twice, and turned him into a Scotsman. Which so I'll just go through more comments. Lucy saying hello to Lucas 12.
Everyone, this is a nice social event. So talk to us. I see there's one about it. The books are better in chronological order. Yes. Still waiting. Speaking of chronological order, what's the next one? It's Sharpe's Assassin that's meant to come out this year, isn't it? Or
no, that's correct. I think it's Sharpe's Command or something. And you're right. That's set in I think 1813, 1812. And so since about 2004 when Sharpe's Havoc came out, it's been sort of slotting in new books in the Peninsular War era of Sharpe, which is slightly irritating because whenever a new one comes out, I feel like I want to reread the whole series first. Yeah, so I've got to go back, read all the indie books, and then up to that point, up to there, I think it'd be Sharpe's Company. I think it comes after. So it's a very sort of slightly irritating thing to do, but at the same time, I suppose it's nice because we at least we're getting a new Sharpe book every year.
It's quite. You can't, you can't win them all, but take the victories where you can take them, I think.
And at least he's not doing a George R.R. Martin. So.
Oh yeah, the Winds of Winter destined to come out on the 12th of Never. I look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. That we're going to say Bernacle does have something slightly like that with the Starbuck Chronicles, which is his American Civil War series.
Yeah.
Started writing. He wrote about 3 books in it, and it's really good. Then he got the idea for the Saxon stories. He said, right, I'll come back and do the rest of Starbuck when I've done the Saxon stories. And that was in about the year 2000, and he's not been back since.
To be fair, I think with the current environment, writing about the Civil War, possibly a sensible decision. Yes. But God damn, it would be nice to have something more to role play on War of Riots. It must be said. So come on, Kroll, come on, come on, Bernard, you can do this. I believe in you.
I should say that Bernacle has written a book that has a slight connection to Sharpe Rifles called The Fortress, called The Fort, which is about a real expedition during the American Revolution called the Penobscot Expedition, where a force of British soldiers were set up on a place called Penobscot in what's now Maine, but was then Massachusetts, and the Americans went to dislodge them, and it was a complete disaster for the Americans. It was the worst military defeat the Americans ever suffered until Pearl Harbor.
Yeah,
and one of the young officers serving in the British forces, Sir John Moore, who in the book is the commander of the British forces at the start of Sharpe Rifles. So interesting connection there.
Well, that's a new one for me. It must be said. I must admit I'm terribly behind on most of my reading material, so I think that'll be a nice one to add for the eventual amount of books that I swear I'm going to read, officer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know that feeling very well.
I can imagine it's a
chicken stitch.
the woes of being a booktuber. See, I'm one of these people who would describe myself as a reader, and then it's what books have you read this year? And right, so listen here. The thing is,
Yeah, life just gets in the way.
yeah, it's quite sad.
And there's also one very entertaining thing about the Force is that a presence on our expedition was Paul Revere, this very famous Paul Revere's ride, with the famous line in the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem, British are coming, the British are coming. And however, Bernard Cornwell portrays Paul Revere as he was in real life. And he really wasn't a nice bloke. And he was really confident as well. And it gets even funnier given that one of the senior infantry officers on the American side who was in command of on the expedition was the grandfather of Longfellow, the one who wrote the poem about Paul Revere. And he had absolutely nothing good to say about Paul Revere, to the extent that he actually gave evidence at him at the court-martial after the Penobscot disaster.
So it's safe to say, turbulent relationship would be the best description.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Goodness. Well, that's the good thing about Cornwell, isn't it? Is his commitment to historical accuracy, but also historical authenticity. I think is the big one. People often confuse the two, don't they? Like,
yeah,
we all know that Sharpe is fictional, but the authenticity of which it's written and just the general understanding of the time period and what the people thought, how they thought, their motivations, their obvious vices and all of that sort of thing. The man, say what you want about the predictability of story writing, but goodness me, does he have a grasp on the time period?
Yeah, he clearly shows he's read a lot, and he also shows he's as much as in love with it as most of his readers are. That he clearly, of course, one of the reasons why he said he wrote Sharpe was because he wanted to write Hornblower on land. And if you don't love the period and you don't love the historical fiction about it, you just don't like books like these. So it really is.
I'd say he's gone with writing Hornblower on land. It become infinitely more prolific than Hornblower, I think.
Oh yeah,
more well known.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hornblower only has about 8 or 9 books with it. I mean, we're currently on the Sharpe about 25. I think 24. So yeah.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Book Time with Elvis. How do you
yes, this is Mark, who's another booktuber. The Elvis of his title is his dog.
Oh, that's simply adorable. Goodness me.
And then we've got Ash Pierre FH, who
I'm judging by that profile picture. That might be on my end of the equation. I tell you, the thing that struck me as well with Cornwell is a lot of similarities to Arthur Conan Doyle with some of his writings of historical fiction, because as I'm assuming your audience are very well acquainted with the history of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He wasn't actually terribly fond of Sherlock Holmes. His true passion was historical military fiction, and I dare say that Cornwell wears a lot of his heart on his sleeve with that particular one, because you can see very much the same. Hello, Goosey. You can see very much all the crossovers, and you can see just that devil in the detail that can only be found truly from that time period, I'd argue. Like, in terms of writers and such, whom, like Cornwell, has done much that has gained quite the cult popularity since, I'd question. Yeah,
I mean, the only author I can think of who's done that, and he was writing he started writing just before Flashman. Sorry, just before Sharpe would be George MacDonald Fraser with Flashman. That He's the only, I'd say he goes slightly better than Sharpe, but that I think has more to do with the fact that he's writing in first person, and as Flashman giving his memoirs, and so he can put in all sorts of footnotes. And there are quite some, and those books are very historically accurate. They're also, because of the accuracy, very funny. Like in Flashman at the Charge, which is about Flashman about the Balaclava, he's working between the War Office and Downing Street when they're about to declare war on the Russians, and he arrives at I can't remember. It's not Downing Street, but it's at some government house where the cabinet are. And when Flashman arrives, you've got Gladstone and another cabinet minister playing croquet on the lawn, and the rest of the cabinet are inside the building, having gotten drunk, and the only sober person is the Prime Minister. And then there's the other, yeah. And then
things change, eh?
yeah. Yeah. The days when you could get the days when cabinet ministers got that drunk, I think are long gone. Yeah, I mean, we're no longer in the era when you had with what's his name, Reggie Maudley when he was Home Secretary and he visited Northern Ireland for the first time in 1970. He did his visit, he got back on the plane, and the first thing he got on the plane as he took off was says, "Good God, what a god awful country! Somebody get me a scotch."
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Well, I'd say we're arguably still in that because who was that Lord? I think in 2011, I forgot his name, Lord something or other. But he was put in charge of the committee regarding alcoholism, alcohol reform, alcohol reflect on society. Until, of course, it came out that the man was on 2 bottles of wine a day. And they found this out when he parked his vehicle on the front of Parliament.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, we can only hope that that will revive in the years to come.
The genetic memory is still there, don't you worry. We're just waiting for the silliness to come out.
So I'll just go through what I call for all of the chat. Thank you, Gordon. So I think at this point we'll move into actually talking about the episode itself. So the first, I'll go through images. So the first one is just to go through the cast. So obviously playing himself is Sharpe.
Ooh, bastard.
Yes. Well, this series is the series where we learn how many ways and times Sean Bean can say the word bastard, and how he doesn't sound right if he starts saying the Yorkshire accent.
Absolutely. To this day, I don't trust the word bastard unless I hear it in the Yorkshire accent.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have the Chosen Men, and these will be the figures who will follow Sharpe throughout the series, right until the end, with only the last 2, well, the last 3, and 2 of those only, in fact, survived the final episode. So just to go through, in this episode, you've got from my left to right, you have Francis Keeper, the Rifleman Francis Keeper, played by Michael Mears. You have Darren O'Malley playing the redoubtable Harper, still Private Harper at the beginning of this film, but Sergeant by the end of it. And then we've got behind Richard Sharpe, we have Jason Stalkey playing Rifleman Harris, named after a real rifleman who wrote a very famous account of his time in the Peninsular Wars in the 95th Rifles. And in fact, there is an audio book on Audible read by Jason Stalkey himself, who was up to the role since the ending of Sharpe. And that's very much worth listening to. Also, the book itself is very much worth buying. And so that's a recommendation for people if you don't know it. And then next to Harris is Perkins, who isn't a chosen man at the beginning of the story, beginning of the TV show, but is by the end of this episode, and then ending with Daniel Hack. Yes, played by John Tams, who also happens to do a lot of the singing in the book, in the film. Sorry, and has done quite a few. It's done at least one album around music. The Music of Sharpe, I think it's called. It was kind of in the late 90s, which bits and pieces are on on YouTube somewhere, so you might be able to put. So if you put in Sharpe music of the series or something like that, it'll come up with 1 or 2 tracks. It's a good thing. Yes, he has. Yes, and he's got a YouTube channel as well, I believe.
Does he now?
They've got some of the filming he did during his time in. I think they filmed a lot of this in the Ukraine in the early 90s. So I think his wife. That's where he met his wife as well. So there's bits about his family life in there, which is interesting. And so obviously this is sort of main cast of men you'll see throughout the series going forward. But as I say, they get reduced considerably until in the final 2 Sharpe episodes, it's only Sharpe and Harper.
The iconic duo.
Yeah. And in this episode, and this is also true for Sharpe's Eagle, Wellington is played by David Troughton, who's sort of very well known character actor in Britain. He's been on screen and stage and done all sorts. Been in Midsummer Murders, Doctor Who twice. Interestingly, in Doctor Who, the first time when his father, Patrick Troughton, was playing the second Doctor in the War Games, which is the second Doctor's last ever story. Which interestingly, if you're interested in, as most people will be watching this, military history, that's quite good because it's about a planet where soldiers from different time periods have been dropped off to play essentially real life war games against each other.
Oh, blimey!
Yeah, it's quite long. It's 10 episodes long, but reasonably good. It has quite a few for the period and their budget. Quite a few good battle scenes in there. I think it's the second Doctor gets dropped in with First World War British soldiers initially, and they sort of are his allies. And one of them is David Troughton, a very junior soldier. One thing I will say about Troughton in this and in Sharpe's Eagle is that he, to my mind, he looks the part of Wellington. If you ever look at images of him, he doesn't necessarily have the personality. In a way that Hugh Fraser, who goes on to play Wellington for the rest of the series, really does.
Mind you, though, I have to say his portrayal, despite that flaw, is sterling. And I think in the future episodes that we're going to review, I'm looking for, you know, the scene I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, that's one that. I will try and get a clip of it so we can play that on the episode. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, actually, I will say in that scene, that does feel like Wellington when he's speaking.
Yeah.
In a way that in this episode in particular, when he's interacting with Sharpe, he doesn't seem as sort of for people who don't know, Wellington was quite sort of formal and cold with people, even when people were equals, and whereas David Troughton portrays Wellington as a lot more of a sort of warm, welcoming character, which wasn't really true.
No, I think it works for good storytelling. Though, helps us really warm up to Wellington.
Yeah, I should say in those things you do get a good sense of sort of what the situation of the British Army is, and the fact that one of the sort of perennial things that Wellington was having to deal with throughout the Peninsular War was fighting tooth and nail with the government in London for men and money, just against the government that sometimes was on his side politically, but a lot of the time necessarily wasn't, and also the opposition were constantly having to go at him.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think as well, it highlights the I think what made Wellington and officers at the time, very especially distinguished much compared to much later when, because I think a lot of people have a large misconception of the army at this time being essentially the army during the Crimea War, where the Crimea War there was a lot more military notoriety and a lot more sort of families and such, whereas in this time period, the gentlemen going into the army as officers, they were still gentlemen, don't get me wrong, but they were sort of like the second or third son of an aristocrat. The first, obviously, inheriting all the titles and everything, and and then others would go off to be priests and ministers or political pundits and such, and thus I think the army was obviously there was still the upper standings of aristocracy, etc., but it was a lot more dominated by the upper middle class, especially during the time period. As you quite rightly pointed out, it was a battle for men and money at the best of times, and I think a lot of people stuff their noses. I think this portrayal of Wellington really sort of sells that pragmatic side of the man himself.
Oh yeah, it was one of the things that you can never accuse Wellington of being is lacking common sense. He knew exactly what he was doing, and also he understood something that his great hero, the Duke of Marlborough, understood, which is logistics. There's that very famous occasion where he'd sent an officer off to it's about 10 miles up the road to where there's a Spanish aristocrat who's going to spy them and stuff, and the officer came back and said, well, he won't give it to us, and Wellington said, why? And the officer said, well, he asked me to bow and I wasn't going to bow to him. Wellington said, well, you might not, but I will. So he rode off to the estate, spoke to the Spanish nobleman, bowed to him, and the army got his supplies. And that's sort of very much Wellington's way of doing things, which he did, which I say, you're quite right, he does show that very well in both David Troughton and also Hugh Fraser later. They both have that real sense of being on top of things and being prepared to win the war properly.
Pragmatic, no-nonsense approach, I think, is the best thing. Our glory, the Sepoy General, as he was known.
Yeah.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
And what just add what you said about the officers in the British Army. I suppose a lot of upper middle class officers. You had a lot of roughly middle class officers, sort of the sons of lawyers, rich cotton merchants, people like that. So the British Army at this point is of course been at war for, is it sort of yes, it's about 17 years at this point. They've been at war since 1793 with a few months stop in the Peace of Amiens. And so all the sort of stuff that you saw during the Crimean War had been gotten rid of within the first couple of years of the war. And so it's now a proper full-time standing wartime army, and Wellington's very much in charge of that. And so it's a good portrayal of that as well, to a degree.
To add on that, if anyone here is a fan, channel called Redcoat History, which I'd very much recommend, very much goes into the topic. It quite extensive detail. Looking at Wellington's army, I think the video has a thumbnail of a Sharpe next to you know who, Sir Henry Siverson. It's definitely worth a watch for a much more enlightening look into the army that we were dealing with at this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. Redcoat History is good. Also, another channel that you could have a look at, especially if you're interested in, say, the Baker rifle used by the 95th Rifles here, and also sort of general military equipment, would be British Muzzleloaders, Rob Caden, who's really good channel. I've mentioned him on the channel before, and I can't recommend him more highly if you want to understand, especially the small arms that the British Army used from essentially the Napoleonic Wars up until the Second World War. Just forgive me a second. Pardon me.
You're pardoned this time.
Thank you. So the next character is Major Hogan, played by Scottish actor Brian Cox, who will appear in the next episode, Sharpe's Eagle. But he doesn't appear after that. I'm not quite sure why. I think it might have been just filming.
Oh, yes. I think the actor sadly had to... he was inundated with health issues, and I think the decision was made thereafter just to cycle through intelligence officers.
Yeah. I mean, that which sort of does happen at the end of the Sharpe books. I think... I can't remember which one it is. In the final Sharpe episodes, the ones in set Sharpe's Siege and Sharpe's Sharpe's Siege onwards. The character there is an intelligence officer who appears in Sharpe books, but the rest of them are sort of made up. So, played by a variety of actors. One of them being Michael Byrne, who is a well-known actor across British TV. He's one of those actors who you may not know his face, but we may not know his name, but you know his face when he appears on screen quite a lot. One thing I will point out at this point that the actors are seeing is that, including Sean Bean, a lot of the actors were well established. So Sean Bean, the year before Sharpe came out in 1903, had been in the Patriot Games with Harrison Ford, which was an adaptation of a Tom Clancy novel, a really good Tom Clancy novel. And Brian Cox had been in Manhunter. Oh, oh man, I think I'm just going to drink. With Michael Mann, where he played before Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal Lecter, which and it's a very different Hannibal Lecter. You see him play in that from the one that you get in Silence of the Lambs. But it's well worth the film, and it is a lot better than the film is. The film Manhunt is a adaptation of Red Dragon, and the Red Dragon film that came out in about 2003 is nowhere near as good as that as the Michael Mann version from the 80s.
Is that cola? Get yourself a Scotch, old boy. That's what I'm doing.
That's I don't know.
We're in the bloody officers' vest. You need the black bottle, sir.
Mentioning that, that's a film we'll have to review at some time as well.
Yes, quite so.
And then we've got just make sure I get pronounce it. Assumpta Serna playing Trader Moreno, who will be for much of the next few Sharpe TV episodes be Sharpe's main love interest. And you see throughout this, you see that sort of developing this story.
Responsible for my my admiration and adornment of foreign women. That's for sure. So thank you, Commandant Teresa. You've set the standards far too high for my liking, but.
And then we have Don Blasivar, played by Simon Andreu, who is Teresa's ally, and he is in the first Sharpe book, and then he reappears in Sharpe's Devil, which is an unusual Sharpe book because it's set after the Colonial Wars in South America. Really enjoyable, but it's not the ordinary Sharpe story, shall we say.
Yeah, quite atypical.
Yeah. Though in that you do get to see Thomas Cochrane, which is always a welcome thing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Especially given that, for those who don't know, Thomas Cochrane was a very well-known and somewhat infamous naval officer in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. And he also happened to be the basis for Jack Aubrey and the Aubrey Battery novels, which we will at some point, no doubt, be reviewing Master and Commander on this in this series. So that's something to look forward to.
Very much so. This is the warm-up match. It's going to get awfully zesty later on, I should think.
And then we have Thomas Vivar, Don Blas-Vivar's brother, played by, interesting, I didn't know this, British actor called Anthony Hyde.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He sells it well, goodness me. I wouldn't have suspected a bloody thing.
Yeah, I mean, that completely came as a shock to me. I only learned that today when I was looking it up. So, and there's something I want to discuss about his character later on when we get to talk about the plot, because it's an interesting thing about the nature of the Napoleonic Wars. I do apologise. So, and then finally, we have two sort of actors who appear early on and then die off. We have characters, I should say. First, we have Major Dunnett, who is Sharpe's initial commanding officer in the series, played by Julian Fellows, who is probably more known now for writing Downton Abbey, as well as a number of other things, sort of TV shows. He did a show called Titanic a few years ago, I think about 10 years ago, which is somehow connected to Downton Abbey. I should say I've never actually seen Downton Abbey.
I've heard raving reviews about it, but they have been from the sort of people who binge watch Coronation Street, so I take that with a slight pinch of salt, it must be said.
Yeah. And standing next to him is Captain Murray, who is played by Tim Bentinck, or to give him his full title, and I want to read this out because it's rare that you get an actor with a name like this. It is Timothy Charles Robert Noel Bentinck, 12th Earl Portland, Count Bentinck of Waldeck, Limburg. So he's
God forbid a man have a side hobby now, Mr. Hook. Goodness me.
The thing is, he is actually descendant of a Prime Minister who was Prime Minister a few years before when this series is set.
Oh, blimey.
Yeah.
So you can see his passion for the time period then.
Yeah. He was, I think it's Lord Portland, and he was head of the Ministry of All the Talents, it was called. So it was between Pitt the Younger. Pitt the Younger was out, then he died before he could get back in, and then Spencer Perceval became Prime Minister, and Spencer Perceval is the only Prime Minister in British history, well, so far, to have been assassinated. He was shot in 1812. And there was
he shot again. I can't quite recall.
It was because the man who shot him was a merchant, and when we went to war with the Americans, he lost out.
Yeah.
Blamed Spencer Perceval for it. There's a very funny incident during the 1997 general election where the descendant of, I think it was Perceval, was a Tory MP, and the candidate for what was called the referendum party, so essentially what will become UKIP, was the descendant of the assassin.
Oh, hello.
So you had the fact facing off. It was
family rivalries run very deep there.
Yeah, but I think the MP got re-elected. But it was I just remember reading reports about it that after the fact. I was not at the time. I was a bit too young, but that sort of strange bit of political trivia that comes up, and it was really quite interesting. And then apparently during the election itself, the two of them did play it up, but they did quite enjoy bringing up the fact.
I can imagine the press must have had a field day with that one.
Yeah, I say so far just to cover myself because you never know given the way politics have gone in the past few years, anything sadly could happen.
Oh, we would never think about assassinating a sitting prime minister. That would be outrageous.
No,
What's this I have? Oh, I don't know where this came from. Sorry, it just appeared as I was talking about it.
And
that was a joke, just to clarify for any YouTube moderators watching, a poor taste joke. The views and opinions here expressed are purely my own and nothing to do with Aaron Hook.
Yeah, and they are all humorous, I should say.
Yeah. Yes, humorous. Absolutely, I completely agree.
And the one thing we should say at this point is that Sean Bean wasn't the original choice for Sharpe. It was Paul McGann, who did some filming. And in fact, I forgot. This is the French colonel, Colonel. Let me just make sure. Colonel Pierre Elclin. I don't think I pronounced that very well.
It's French. It's the language of dogs.
who played an actor called Malcolm Jamieson. So I didn't have time to look up if he was British or not. But again, if he is British, he does a very good job as a French actor, the French accent. And then, yes, as I mentioned, so Paul McGann was initially cast as Sharpe, and there's some, you can see here, publicity shots, and the reason why he had to stop, he couldn't continue with the role, was because when they were in the Ukraine doing some filming, they were playing football, and he broke his foot, and so he had to. That's how Sean Bean came in, and so that's why Sean Bean is Sharpe and not Paul McGann.
It probably made the series as iconic as it is nowadays. Having Sean Bean, it must be said.
Yeah, the interesting thing, just connection with Doctor Who again. If Paul McGann had played Sharpe, he might not have ended up playing the Eighth Doctor. And because though the Eighth Doctor has only been on TV screen once, because of Big Finish, the audio drama series, he's been the Doctor the longest of any other Doctor going. In fact, I think he technically still is going through those dramas. So he'd have a completely different career path if he stayed on Sharpe.
Blimey, well, it turned out well for him then.
So
everyone's a winner in this particular circumstance.
Yeah. So at this point, I'll just get us on to so that we can start going through the plot. I hope we just make sure.
Any of you lurking right now whom have not liked and subscribed to Mr. Hook, this podcast, make sure you do, because no, otherwise I'll send you a strongly worded letter or something. It won't be pretty, sir. I will not be generous towards your character.
And I could say Henry has written quite a few letters in his time. One particular to Spitting Brit, and I think it shocked him so much. He still hasn't responded.
And can we blame him, really?
So obviously the episode begins with the wonderful opening title and wonderful music. And at the beginning, for those who've never seen Sharpe, at the beginning of each episode, you get sort of that guitar music coming in, wonderfully done. Whoever came up with the combination of the music and this opening sequence is clearly a genius, because it
completely fair.
Fits the series utterly and gets you drawn into it almost immediately.
A good blend of traditional and modern as well, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it's sort of, I haven't got it here, but when the titles change, you then get a rundown of where you are in terms of the war and what's going on, and it really does. It's a good way of putting you in the time and place that you need to be. So it really does work well. And Baldwin's Henry agrees. It's exactly that, yeah.
Absolutely. It's my headcanon now that the electric guitar is period accurate to the Napoleonic era. I don't care what anyone else tries to present to me.
Oh, fair enough. And so the episode begins with Wellington going for a ride. Interestingly dressed quite accurately. This is what Wellington typically wore when he was on campaign, which was a simple, quite threadbare blue coat, blue jacket, and white trousers, and very little. He didn't really change much in his sort of clothing when he's on campaign. And whenever you see, sorry.
Oh no, I was just about to say it very much goes back to his pragmatic attitude, doesn't it? It was, pomp and circumstance when required, but for the most part, just put on a tunic to show his difference in position of authority and station, and just get on with it. Very, very indicative of the man, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. He had the same attitude towards his men. He didn't mind that they weren't exactly necessarily the best dressed, as long as their muskets were in all working order and they could use them properly. He could put up with a bit of, not necessarily a sort of not playground order in terms of the uniform.
Yes, but it's even so much so that I can never remember the chap's name, but the Scottish major, wasn't it, or something, at the Battle of Waterloo himself, whom his entire trunk of military uniform was attended battle looking rather dapper in civilian wear.
Oh yeah, Thomas Picton. Yes.
Yes, that's the chappy. Yes, as long as you can command the men, it doesn't really matter what you wear.
I should say this is Guy Riddihoff. He's a science fiction author, and he's also a scientist himself.
Oh, goodness me.
I should say, Guy, that the white crosses on the uniform and the red jackets weren't actually that particularly didn't stand out that very much. There's I previously mentioned we've mentioned a couple of channels. Another one for sort of British military history is a channel called Ministry for History, run by Darryl Rivers, who's an American historian, and he has done various tests on this, and also Brandon F is another good channel.
Yeah.
He did a very good video where he's an American. He's a American Revolutionary War reenactor as a British soldier. And he and a couple of his friends who were part of the reenactment group and went out into the woods and a second. And they hid, and until they stood up, they were in full red jackets with the white cross belts, and until they stood up, you couldn't see where they were. So it's a commonly believed, but it really wasn't true that the uniforms particularly stood out. Interestingly, the uniforms I believe that stood out the most were the Austrian uniforms, and they were in white.
Yeah, pure white. Well, it goes there. And even if you look at uniform back then compared to today, and you look at the current happenings in the Ukraine war at the moment, and bloody, despite the fact they're all camouflaged to high heaven anyway, they have to have those bloody armbands on to recognise each other to avoid friendly fire. Personally, I make the argument to bring this back to the military, though my contemporaries tend not to agree with me. They try all sorts of things, but nonsense, quite frankly. I think you can hide well enough in this, as it's already been proven, as you said. So, go back to it, drip or die, sir.
I can see an argument for that, but I can also see the opposition you get from the Ministry of Defence for that.
Yes, but they're a load of wet wipes. They're not the the alcoholic aristocrats they used to be. They don't have the spirit of war in them. I say, Ministry of Defence. Give me back the War Ministry every day of the week. Now those men knew how to send men into battle. But sorry, as we were saying, yes, quite. It's They don't stand out terribly much, but yes, they do look a bit like targets. But slight caveat to that as well in terms of targeting. Part of that is the British Army has always had a tradition of making people targets for very specific reasons. So, if you don't know about military parades that even persist to this day, we line up in height order. So we do our assembling in order. We, to the right numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. Assemble in height order and everything. Then reform our, whatever it is you're particularly in at the time, troop, parade, squadron, etc. To be so, it will curve to be a dip in terms of height. So it'll be like a bowed bridge. And the theory behind that, which arguably was quite well-founded, was that the enemy forces would target the smaller chaps, especially in melee, because they'd be like, "Oh, there's smaller chaps, I want to go for them. They're less scary because they're smaller." And then they'd get encircled by the taller gentlemen. Quite a bit of clever military psychology there, I have to admit.
I'm gonna say I didn't know. That's new. I'm gonna say that is new to me.
Well, the more you know.
Yeah. And just to continue what you say, just to answer the rest of your question, Guy, with the British Army, initially the khaki was first used in the Indian Mutiny by British troops serving there, and then it was used by the British Indian Army at various points during the 1860s, 1870s, and then in the 1880s, we started the khaki is adopted across the board, and so I think the last time British soldiers fight wearing the traditional red jackets is I think, during the Battle of Tel El Kabir, or maybe it might be a bit later. I think there might have been a unit wearing it during one of the Gordon Relief expedition. But after that, so from the late 1880s onwards, the British Army is in khaki, and then you have the changeover in the Edwardian era to from the khaki that, for example, if you've seen the film Four Feathers, that sort of very sort of proper sort of brown khaki, sandy brown khaki, switches over to the khaki serge that you see in World War One, and that sort of becomes the standard British uniform, I think, right up until the 60s and 70s when they bring in the DPM, is it?
Yes, DPM. Well, various different patterns as well, but DPM originally used by special forces, borrowed from obviously the Fallschirmjäger. Well, yes, it started to become widespread. The world over. Funny for that matter. As I recall, we adopted camouflage patterns slightly before the colonial. Sorry, the Yanks. As I recall. Sorry, slip of the tongue there. I keep on doing that, but yes, it's camouflage started being used well into the 19th century. That's the 19th century, isn't it? Sort of that time period. Yes, well into that. Quite frankly, lots of hogwash. You want to look like this going into a battle. You want to. It's and a lot of regiments in the British Army still, obviously for their parade dress, etc., still retain a lot of the regiment uniform. Like the initial regiment I was with in the British Army, the King's Royal Hussars. You may know us as various titles, the Napoleon's Chamber Pot Maids and the Cherry Pickers and such. We don the red trousers, unlike any other regiment in the army. To distinguish ourselves. Sorry, red trousers, crimson trousers. But yes, a lot of it still. I mean, even then, in terms of ceremonial uniform application, etc., they were still employing it. Even Operation Banner in Northern Ireland. Little caveat with the parachute regiment famously depicted there wearing their berets. Originally, they were wearing helmets and such. But it was decided that the beret, because they were supposed to be keeping the peace and such, the beret presented a much more, presented a tone of peacekeeping rather than, the full battle rig with the helmet and everything.
Which I've got to say, trying to soften the image of the parachute regiment, it doesn't necessarily seem advisable.
Yeah, it's kind of.
I mean, putting aside also the parachute regiment's history with Northern Ireland,
yeah, right. They're not the most popular there, it must be said.
Try turning them into a place which was, even though it was part of the United Kingdom, in a state of civil war, and then trying to pretend that they're some like the peace-loving hippies with using a beret.
The one regiment that are just totally opposed to that. And it's like, oh, no, they'll be fine. Don't even worry about it.
Yeah. So you sometimes wonder what goes on in the mind of people in the Ministry of Defence, and until you remember that they do not have them.
Right.
So, at the beginning of the episode, we have Wellington going for his ride, which I believe he did quite often, and he did it with he had a dog with it. He has a dog with him here, and I believe he down a dog. So, some of the local French men are watching. Yeah. Correct response, Englishman. And so they start, and he rides back Sharpe, and Sharpe at this point is a sergeant in the 95th Rifles. I will come back to this point in a moment.
Yes.
This reasoning. And then Wellington rides across the river, sees the French, and makes the quite sensible decision that when faced with 3 French cavalrymen on your own, retreating is the best option going.
Personally, I see that as cowardice, but what can you do? What can you do?
Well, I don't think Wellington even has a sword with him when he rides.
They're French. Come on. There's something funny here.
And so, so Wellington runs away, or as Henry would regard it.
Tactical withdrawal. I'll give him that. He can have that one.
And Sharpe comes to his aid with his rifle and takes out the three Frenchmen.
So Sharpe could do it. Why can Wellington?
Yeah, but you're forgetting Sharpe's a Yorkshireman.
True.
And for this, we've seen defeating the Frenchmen again. And for this, Wellington makes Sharpe an officer, or as he puts it in the dialogue,
a damn good turn, Sharpe. Now I'm going to do a damn bad one.
Now, the reason I said I wanted to bring this up is because in the book, this doesn't happen because Sharpe actually becomes.
Yes, or rather, it didn't happen because it had already happened.
Yes, because in the series, though it hadn't been depicted in the books at the point that Sharpe rifles had been written, Sharpe actually does save the life of Wellington, but it's in India at the Battle of Vasai, which gets depicted in Sharpe's Triumph, which is one of my favourite Sharpe books. It's a really, really good book, and so Sharpe at that point gets made an officer in the 74th Highlanders, I believe, in my memory.
Yes.
And in the scene, we also see Major Hogan, who sees Sharpe as a useful tool and decides to put him to work, which sort of becomes Sharpe's job throughout the rest of the series through Hogan and his various successors. So I'll just move on to the next slideshow. So just for a second. Oh no, wrong one. And so in the next scene, we are introduced to our two villains, the French colonel, and at this point he is only referred to as the Man in Black, who are going after a group of Spanish guerrilleros, which is actually where we get the phrase guerrilla in terms of warfare from. Because I think it was guerrillero, or guerrilleros was this little war in Spain, it was called. And so since then it's become guerrilla warfare, that's where the phrase comes from. Far more, it should be points out, far more effectively than the Americans like to claim during their revolution.
Oh, yes, they're guerrilla warfare.
One thing, the constant thing about the Americans saying they were shooting with Kentucky rifles behind trees whilst the British were just standing there being shot at in line is not true.
Yes. All I'm going to say is, how many major land battles did those colonial rustics win?
Yeah.
It's not many, as I recall, actually. Not many.
Yeah. And when it came to sort of the backward fighting, that was as much done by loyalist groups against the rebels as it was anybody else. And also, when the British regulars had to do it, they did it quite well. And so this is where guerrilla warfare, as we know it, because this is the first clear-cut example of guerrilla warfare, and it is really effective. I mean, the French guerrillas, by about 1812, have got to the stage where if the French want to send a dispatch rider anywhere across Spain, they have to send him with I think it's like a squadron of cavalry or something to make sure that person make sure the dispatch rider will reach the location alive, because the Spanish guerrillas were that effective.
Yes, they were fearsome. Fearsome things. So, but it ultimately contributed to to some of the failings of Napoleon's campaign. It was just that devastating. Orders were given just to. It's why they took they've often been described as treating the Spanish residents as particularly harshly, as we'll come on to find with Commandant Teresa and such. And there was good reason for that, as much as I hate to give those frog bastards any credit for anything, is they really did suffer at the hands of guerrillas. Like, this was the sort of thing, like sneaking into camp at night and slitting the throats of sentries and all sorts of crazy sort of Spaniard happenings, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I think it's absolutely clear that the Spanish guerrillas were a lot more effective than the Spanish regular forces, who Wellington, I seem to remember, a lot of the British officers as well didn't seem to have very high opinion of, nor did the Portuguese. They were a lot more effective as sort of regular forces than the Spanish regulars were.
Yeah, quite so. I think it was where the term ungentlemanly warfare was actually coined, as I recall, with British officers overseeing some of their Spanish compatriots, and despite again being upper middle class, they still had all the trappings of aristocratic ambition and such, and they saw that sort of fighting. The Spanish were perfectly fine with it because the Spaniards have been under brutal regime previously. They know what they're doing. The British, on the other hand, they were a bit like, ooh, that's a bit. It's a bit. I think actually, as I recall, it was. Let me just double check if I've got my time periods right on this. Let me just double check. Yes, it was largely. I think it was compared to some of the things that they saw during the Haitian Revolution, and I think the British government, most especially, while they wanted victory and while they were always happy to be as underhanded as needed to be to obtain that victory, they did not like the comparisons to the Haitian Revolution. It was still very fresh in memory, very fresh.
Yeah, and quite understandable given, especially 1803, 1804 with the massacres.
Yeah, it's quite true.
And so this scene was seeing them being chased, and they are being chased because they have a box, which I don't. It's in one of the later images of the box, and this box becomes an important part of the plot of why it is they're doing it and how Sharpe gets caught from it. And so we then see Sharpe being introduced to the chosen men, and I would like to apologise at this point. The fact that you can see the volume bar on this image, I forgot about that.
Can't win them all.
Yeah, I should just say that these screenshots are just ones I took off my phone from the Sharpe Rifles is on YouTube for free on an official ITV channel called ITV Drama. I've linked it in the description. They've got all the episodes from Sharpe Rifles of Sharpe Waterloo so far. And so the way I did this was just taking screenshots on my phone. And unfortunately, in this case, I forgot to accidentally press the volume bar at the same time. So, but anyway, so we've got the chosen men. We've got Isaiah Tongue on my left, who's played by. Let me just make the actor's name right. By Paul Trussell. And on the right, we have Sergeant Williams, played by Richard Ison, who will soon meet an unfortunate end. But more of that later. And Sharpe's interaction with the chosen men, in particular Harper, how would you describe it, Henry?
Unbecoming of a gentleman officer.
Yes, absolutely. As you see here, that Harper is woken up by Sharpe in not a particularly pleasant fashion. Harper reacts, to be honest, quite understandably to this, and there's a small fight ensues where Sharpe does not get on the right side of the men, nor, for that matter, does he get on the right side of the two rifle officers under Dunnett and Murray. And Dunnett in particular makes it quite clear that a man about Sharpe not being a proper officer, and it's interesting in this scene. You get the sense that not only is Sharpe not seen as a proper officer by other officers, the men don't.
Men as well, yeah.
And it shows how sort of the hierarchy in the drama was something that was supported not just by people at the top, but also people at the bottom. It was the consent that there's a degree of consent there that people, I think, these days don't quite understand.
No, I think it's very much relegated. It goes into it later in the line when the captain is dying, doesn't it? Of how it's actually described. And while articulated very well by the gentleman officer, the captain. The version applies over to the enlisted men, though they describe it a tad more coarsely, I'd wager. But very much it was prolific throughout the time period, and it was very much a class-dominated society.
Yeah, and it was one where we have this idea today that everybody at the bottom was resentful of people at the top, and the people at the top hated everybody at the bottom. It wasn't. It was there were people who were like that, both ends. For the most part, everybody that idea of "I know my place" was something right across the board, and it wasn't seen as a bad thing. It was seen as just, this is where society is. This is how things work. We're going to work. And things
very much a sort of idea of natural law, as it were.
Yeah. There's a very real sense among most people that this was the natural order of things, and upsetting the apple cart was just a bad idea. It was at best foolish and at worst downright dangerous. Which interestingly comes up with something later on with the man in black, who we'll come to soon. And so Sharpe then goes through the parade with his men, where he continues his disastrous introduction to them by going the wrong side of each one of them. And then we see them march up. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is Sharpe has been put with these men because the army's banker, and James Rothschild, has disappeared, and he's got the army's pay, with a bank order with the army's pay. And so Sharpe is being sent with the chosen men and the rest of the battalion that they're attached to try and find him. And that's actually a reference to something a bit about the British Army and sort of the funding of the Napoleonic War, which is that from the British side is that it was Nathaniel Rothschild and his brother James who really did sort of fund things really a lot for the British Army. Obviously, they made quite a bit of money killing in the aftermath of Waterloo, because I think it was James was in Brussels. As soon as the battle was won, he rode back to London, got there before the news reached them, and then they bought or sold a great deal of shares they had, and so that sort of made them a fortune when the news finally reached London. So they both funded the British war effort and made themselves a small fortune out of it.
I will refrain from saying anything regarding this particular matter, but very typical.
Yeah. So moving on. So then the battalion moves out, and they get ambushed by the French colonel and the man in black, in which most of the battalion gets killed, including Sergeant Williams. However, Brockman Perkins is saved, and so he gets attached to Sharpe's men. And they then spend the next bit of the episode wondering, trying to recovering from what's happened. And the men decide that they are going to go south. They're going to return to the British Army, which I think is somewhat interesting. That then they're actually technically not deserting.
No.
They're going against orders, but they are intending to go against orders to return to the army, not to desert and go and live somewhere else. Which I think shows you that for all of their dislike of Sharpe at this point, they are still loyal to the army and they're willing to fight for it.
Yes, and they're still acting within their purview of being soldiers, and hardly to blame them at this point, because it's been a practice that has since been discontinued in the British Army, that there's a need to know basis type thing with the instruction. Thus only the officers were instructed. They have no idea what was going on. They have no idea. This new officer gallivants in, makes a terrible impression on them all, and is taking them off to missions that they haven't even remotely seen orders to. Yeah,
and I do wonder if the officer hadn't been Sharpe, he probably would have gone along with them.
Mm.
But Sharpe, from his point of view, he's newly commissioned and he's been given this job and he's going to see it through. It's absolutely him determined to do that. And this leads to a proper fight with Harper, with the other men cheering him on, that ends with Don Blasivar and Fraser showing up, interrupting it. And they ended up recruiting, Sharpe ends up going in with them. And it's around this point that the Sharpe's relationship with his men start changing, where he starts starting to get on with them. And you see this particularly in the next scene, where I'll come to that. The next scene you will see that, but Sharpe also shows at this point his intelligence as well, with the fact that he gets just after the fight, he gets Harris to come with him to go and do something. And then when the French who are pursuing them turn up and go to the barn, as soon as one goes inside, it blows up.
Blown to Kingdom Come.
which gives you a good idea, which shows you that Sharpe is a good choice for an officer. He's clearly intelligent. He knows what he's doing.
Yes, he knew that the scout troop would want to investigate and such, and his natural intuition as a soldier really plays in there. And as we're about to find out, his men, I think this is one of the sort of pivotal moments that really warms his men up to him, is he displays that, yes, he's, quite frankly, not very acquainted with the new station he's been given in life, but he's still a soldier, and he still has the thought process of a soldier, and clearly with enough experience as well.
Yeah, very much so. And I think at this point, it also sort of makes Don Blasivar and Fraser understand who they're dealing with. That the man who he might not necessarily like, his men not like him, but he knows what he's doing, and it makes him very much a valuable ally in what they're planning to do. And so that almost after this scene, you see this where Sharpe helps Hagman up out to this muddy field, sort of swamp.
Yeah.
And Hagman makes a point that he might be covered in mud, but his rifle is clean, and sort of you can see Sharpe sort of changing there, and he helps him up, and they have this quite nice and actually funny conversation about how Sharpe's injury in regards to the start of the episode is paying him up because of the weather. And Hagman gives him some advice of brown paper and oil. And Hagman explains he discovered this after he got into a fight with a French hussar who lost the argument when Hagman blew his head off.
God bless you, Daniel Hagman.
And so this is really the point. And as you say, this is the area of the film where episode where things start changing. There's a Sharpe relationship with his men, and at the same time, we've got the Colonel and the Man in Black are following him. Oh, we've got to following on. Hello.
Hello, Horace.
I take it he's one of your chaps. Henry.
Yes, Sergeant Horace is. You're Sergeant, aren't you, Horace? I recall you're Sergeant in the first RM, of course.
I should say that I haven't linked their channel in the description, but I will do after we finished. So if you're interested in that, you can
so if you fancy more of this Sharpe type business, I'll be honest, slightly more bombastic than the show, but if you fancy it all,
yes, I think watched some of the streams with the First Royal Marines, particularly with Henry on. It's the volume is a lot louder.
You're getting quiet, Henry, presently. I must say that I find myself very familiar with the leadership style of Sharpe in the first half of this one, where I think loudness often conveys the authority. Is quite right. You need it to as well.
Yeah. Especially on the occasions when, for example, you're commanding a ship and the crew seem to have suddenly become deaf.
Yeah.
That's recently discovered.
Yes, correct. It's seamen by name because they are they come from the scrotum and act in such a manner as well. But yes, please.
Yeah, and so we have the Colonel and the Man in Black who are following them. It becomes clear at this point that they are not following Sharpe; they are following Don Blattivar, Fraser, and the Box. And so they set up an ambush where the town that they're all making for gets sacked, and Sharpe and most of the Spaniards go in and fight the French, and then the French draw off. I should say this isn't so much a spoiler because it's actually up there in the subtitles when the French commander speaks. He says that's enough. It's time for them. That'll be enough to keep them away from the Box. And at this point, they discover the missionaries, who are Methodists, which which is a strange thing to be in Spain in 1809.
Yeah.
It's not exactly an advisable thing to be. Well, when I say advisable, it's not necessarily a good thing from my point of view, given I don't have the best to be a Methodist in England at this point. We decided to go and try and convert the Spanish to John Wesley's creed is sort of beyond me.
Yes, I think. Well, obviously it's revealed a bit later, but surely you'd think they'd have a bit of a better cover story than Methodist.
Yeah. You think they'd try and make? You would have thought at least they'd make them Anglican.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But well, again, not to comment too many words on the matter, but how typical to facade as something that you're not of one of these particular characters. But again, I'll leave it at that.
And so they explain that they are Methodists and they are missionaries, bringing the word of John Wesley to not their description, by the way. That's my description. Wesleyan nonsense. I should say I'm an agnostic. I just don't like. I just have the religious prejudices of a Tory voting Anglican parson about it.
It's all right. I hold those prejudices, and I'm Eastern Orthodox, so it's quite all right. the contempt for the Methodists is very much universal. You'll come to find.
And so they're here doing that, and they have a daughter who can speak French, and she mentions the fact that the French officer ordered them into retreat so they could get to the Box, and so this causes Sharpe and the others to go back to the Box. However, in the meantime, Harper, who after fighting with Sharpe in the barn has been a prisoner, is tied to the donkey or the horse that's got carrying the Box, and he defends it from the Man in Black, who, as Harper says later on, is dressed like an undertaker, which is quite true. And you get a nice small fight where Harper takes out two French soldiers, one with with the ramrod still fired from the musket, or is it the rifle? I can't remember what he's got at them in this. Either way, right through the throat of the French cavalryman. Which I don't think I've ever seen that done before in a Napoleonic era film or TV show.
Quite. It wasn't unheard of that sort of thing would happen, primarily by mistake, it must be said, in the heat of panic. But yes, losing your ramrod is a flogging offence, and there's damn good reason for it. But I think Harper could be forgiven in this particular occasion.
Yeah, and well, he did the job. He did the job he needed to. He killed both of them and saved the Box. So, and you do get that nice scene afterwards when Sharpe returns, and he talks about going off half-cocked, and then he tells Harper to fall in with the ranks, and Don Blattivar is sort of bewildered at this, how Sharpe said that and Harper's happy, and Don Blattivar says, "Well, I'm going to ask him for some kind of reward," and Harper says, "I don't need to. He's giving one." He said, "Fall in."
Yeah, it makes a nice change from facing the firing squad.
And it really, I think this is the point where the men's attitude towards Sharpe has completely changed. They're now on his side, and he's very much on their side. All of his sort of bawling out of Harper, which is as much sort of comedic as anything else, I think, at that point. It's really well done. And then they arrive at a mission. It's a monastery, I think, and they get fed. And it's just at this point the Sharpe works out what is in the box, and it is a banner. Oh, sorry.
It's in fact Major Hogan. He's been hiding there that entire time.
Yes, I'm going to say if that was true, it'd be a damn sight heavier box. And so what's been hidden inside the box is a flag, a banner of St. James being the patron saint of Spain, and Don Basilar's ancestor during the Reconquista was fighting the Moors and raised the banner, and the legend goes that St. James appeared and defeated the Moors. And so the idea is they're going to go to a town, they're going to raise the banner of St. James and cause the local population to rise up. Sharpe isn't necessarily very impressed by this, because he doesn't believe it will work. However, Major Hogan has been following them through at this point. Says it's going to work, and you're going to take part in it. At which point, Sharpe ends up taking part.
It shows I think it's a nice little thing as well. Is the subtext of the writing as well, and the attention to detail is obviously he comes from primarily Richard Sharpe. Comes from primarily a sort of obviously English folklore and such, but comes from a much more Protestant background compared to Catholic Spain, whom especially at the time, it's they're still agricultural society, much more heavily so than England and such, and thus these superstitions and the national pride is a damn sight different to what might be found in England. I think it's a nice little bit of subtext to be found in it myself, in terms of the cultural difference of the view of the plan, and Hogan, obviously being an intelligence officer, his coat buttoning up among a number of other duties is quite aware of the fact. I think it shows the difference that Hogan is aware of not only the people he's fighting against, but the people whom are native to the land and whom are the allies. He's a lot more aware of it than the common enlisted man would be ultimately.
Yeah, and one criticism I would have this scene is they miss something. Is a scene pretty much does happen in the book, but there's one thing in the book that's said that would probably make sense to Sharpe in the film, which is in the book. Hogan, it's not Hogan, but it's the Methodist missionary's daughter says that the story about St. James and the banner is like Drake's drum. And I think if that had been mentioned, that would have made more sense. But that said, there is a nice line about people won't fight for a flag. And Hogan said, well, you do.
You do, Sharpe. You do.
It's very. I think it's very effective, and it's a really good scene. It also builds into something that I'm going to bring up shortly about the ideological nature of the Napoleonic Wars, which is something there's a particular scene that's coming up that I'll elaborate more on that. So this is sort of explaining it, and this is interesting because in the book these two characters do end up getting married, and I'm not sure if that's made quite clear in the series at all, because obviously Don Blattyvar doesn't reappear in the series again. So it does seem so, from given that they are quite close in the dinner scene beforehand and in here. So
the lady next to him's Louise Parker, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Where I think it's probably for the best that they inserted Teresa and miss out Miss Parker is the core difference, especially this early on. I think it would have been for a television episode and a pilot episode as well. Ultimately, I think highlighting that particular plot thread of Sharpe falling hard and it not quite going his way. I think I think it was the right decision to skip out on that particular one.
Yeah.
And also, I just adore foreign women as well. So good on you, Sharpe.
So I'll just go on to the final slides. I hope that. Well, I think it's final ones. Here we go. So they are going through with it. Oh, sorry. You get Tracer, who does a bit of action, where she takes out 2 French guards at the front gate and then lets them in. And so they go inside, and they end up fighting the French initially, and a proper battle. And I will say one thing at this point, that there is a common criticism of the Sharpe series about its not having a big enough budget and not having enough people on screen.
Mm.
But I would say, at least for this episode, given the nature of the plot, it looks reasonably good, and the number of men they're fighting seems to be enough.
Yes, definitely. I know. Sharpe was the command he held was a bit tighter, but I think it was the right decision ultimately with budget constraints, etc. They were like, well, we can't have too many present and too much present, so why don't we just focus it on the character drama and dynamics? And I think that's ultimately part of the entire heart of the Sharpe franchises. It's it really gets that idea that the time period is a back setting to, it's a character drama going on, happens to be very authentic to the time period, which I think very much the right call. The show producers knew their limitations, knew what they could and couldn't do, etc., and still very much kept the spirit of things, I'd say.
Yeah, very much so. And I will also say that you probably wouldn't have got Hornblower if you hadn't had Sharpe.
Precisely that.
Hornblower, which comes out, I think, the same year that Sharpe ends. The initial run is they're both on ITV, and that has a far bigger budget, not by American standards, but by British standards.
Yes.
Quite a bit. Just wait a second. I should say, ladies and gentlemen, that when we do the next episode, hopefully I will not have a cough and a cold.
We can only pray.
Yeah. And so the battle then has a slight pause, where Sharpe finally actually has a face-to-face meeting with both the French colonel and the man in black. And it's at this point we learn that the man in black is Thomas Vivart, who is Don Blassevar's brother, and they're both claiming the title of the Count of Matamoros. Now, I mentioned earlier about the ideological nature of the Napoleonic Wars. Sharpe asks Thomas Vivart why he's fighting for the French, and he gives a very clear answer, which is he believes in reason, he believes in the Enlightenment, and the French are bringing that to Spain. And I find this interesting because when it comes to depictions of the Napoleonic Wars on screen, whether that's TV or film, you very rarely shown the fact that the Napoleonic Wars were very much an ideological war between, on the one side, Napoleon's empire, which, as far as Napoleon was concerned, was the pinnacle of the ideals of the French Revolution. He was a true believer in the French Revolution. And on the other side, you have essentially the old regimes of Europe fighting against that. And with Thomas Vivart, he's a representation of somebody who believes in the French Revolution, believes in the Enlightenment. But the type of the name for a Spanish collaborator with the French at the time was, and also this was true for the Portuguese, who were the same, was Franquisardos, Frenchified, and that meant in sense of the ideals of the French. So, and it's nice to see that. It's not something that occurs much in the TV series. But in the books, I do know that on a number of occasions, especially when Pierre Ducos appears in the books, where it's mentioned that he is very much a survivor from the revolutionary period. He's still, I think in Sharpe's Enemy, when he's introduced to Sharpe for the first time, the French colonel who Sharpe is going on with mentions the fact that Ducos still uses the old French revolutionary calendar. And he was in the Committee for Public Safety during the Reign of Terror. And so there's that element of understanding the ideological motives in the books, but in the TV show, it's not mentioned again very much. And in fact, when I think about it, the only two examples I can think of where you see that ideological motive during the Napoleonic War being mentioned on screen, one is in Hornblower, but that's because that's mostly set in the French Revolutionary Wars. Only the final episode of that is set in the Napoleonic Wars. And the other one would be Master and Commander, where you have that scene before, I think it's the last battle, that Jack Aubrey's giving a speech to his men, and he says, "Do you want the guillotine in Piccadilly? No. Do you want Napoleon as your king? No. Do you want your children singing the Marseillaise? No." And so there's this real sense there that Jack Aubrey and his men, that they're not fighting just French men, they're fighting French ideas. But beyond that, you don't really see that in a lot of on-screen fiction. It's a lot more in books. So, as I mentioned, Sharpe, you get it very much in the Aubrey Maturin books. And when anybody who's read, say, the Scarlet Pimpernel, you'll see that there pretty clearly.
Yeah, I do think it's a greatly missed opportunity to explore the ideological side, because as you quite rightly pointed out, it was, very much an ideological war. It was, almost in its entirety an ideological war. It's why, himself, the emperor, was branded an enemy of humanity, largely, in fact, because of the existential threat that he presented to, the aristocratic ways, the old ways, etc. And it very much prompted our own changes in the country. Arguably the so many, parts of the modern day that we come to realize were inspired largely as sort of a counterpoint to the French Revolution. Like, for the most obvious example, I'd say to myself anyway, would be the adoption of a police service. Briefly jabs are made later on in the Sharpe series regarding that. But no, I think it's as you say, explored a tad more in the books. But equally at the same point, I think it also does a service to the characters in that, because Sharpe is a man from the ranks. He's not invested in this huge ideological war, and I think largely, as much as it's missed opportunity, I think it's also, again, sticking to the heart of the originals of this isn't for them, this isn't a great ideological war that represents the future of Europe and the European society at the time. For them, they happen to be in the army and they're fighting for the men next to them. I think it's quite good in that aspect, much as I would have liked to have seen these sort of explorations of things. And I'd argued, to a degree, you do see it again, the subtext of it, during later in the series when Sharpe is put on trial. You see that subtext very much explored, maybe not at the heights that it could have been, but certainly it's there, and it's quite interesting to see the argument of meritocracy versus aristocracy in that, and how it's presented, and I'd argue potentially a little unfairly portrayed, but all the same, yes, I think you're quite right on that one, Mr. Hook.
It could be interesting as we sort of go on through Sharpe and Hornblower and the other one to see how often that sort of pops up, because from my memory, it doesn't do so very often, which is
no, not at all.
However, at this point, they sort of the French colonel says you can surrender or we will wipe you out, and Sharpe says we're not going to surrender. So then the battle restarts and all hell breaks loose. And you have some great. I think these scenes are really good. So this is probably the biggest battle you have in this episode, and it's really well done. There's also, as happens quite throughout this episode, throughout sort of the Sharpe series, there are bits of comedy in there. Sort of, they're very short but very illuminating. So you have it when Hagman and Perkins go into the church and the choir is singing, and then they take the hats off, and then when Patrick Harper comes in afterwards, he before he goes off to join Sharpe to go up on the roof, he crosses himself and bends down, and so you get this nice sense of the sights of absurdity of things that are going on, which would be quite realistic, especially for the devout Catholic like Harper.
Yeah, and very just indicative of how much of a, well, arguably how much of a civilian war this one was compared to it. You know, compared to some of the later battlefields you see in the later wars you see and everything like that. How much it was very much in with the civilian population, and there were these things going on, etc. You know, it's and really, I'd say it ultimately where you first see the birth of these sorts of modern military tactics, in that where they're having to deal with the civilian populace at the same time. And well, obviously in at this time period, it's a lot more cut and go. But yes, it's quite interesting all the same to see, I think.
Yeah, and that you can sort of see that with, if you think about the big battles of the Napoleonic Wars, they're almost all taking place in some field somewhere around, usually outside of town, by some distance, and there's nobody else about other than the two armies facing themselves. Whereas, as you mentioned in this, you've got the civilian population are in the houses in front of which you're fighting. And so the battle goes on. The chosen men get up to the roof and they start taking pot shots at the Frenchmen, and quite successfully. The French occasionally fired back, but as they have only got one, they might. I would think roughly I say they're within range. You can never quite tell with films, but the muskets look like they're in range of their accuracy. To fire the roof.
Well, well, I say muskets there, Mr. Hook. They're armed with rifles, don't you know? No, I'd say it's quite a. I think a lot of people have a lot of misconception with the range of these weapons back in the day. They obviously nothing compared to an individual shooter with an SA-80 in the modern day is expected to be accurate for about 300 meters, whereas on a squad level it's 600 meters. And while they didn't quite have that range, I think a lot of people, when they see the realistic fighting distances that sometimes these things would happen, I think they'd be shocked that there is still a fair bit of range involved. And again, the British at this point, I think very much they'd learned a lot of lessons from the American Revolutionary War in that aspect, with the use of light infantry and riflemen, etc. And it's how you can see in the war, in this particular war, they were used to a lot more effect. Whereas, the French were, and I think it's highlighted in this, the French were a lot more reliant on their infantry formations and cavalry. The British were fielding, not quite as many light infantry and riflemen, etc. But they'd learned their lessons. They'd seen how useful it could be. And of course, with the Spanish guerrillas, as we've already touched on as well, with the terrain environment we're fighting in, etc. It's very, very much shows the nature of a changing battlefield, I think.
Oh, pretty much so. And so the fight goes on, and then we get a fight between the two brothers, which is well done. And it really is sort of epitomises the fight that Spain's going through at this moment in time. So you've got Don Bativar, the brother of the old order, and then you've got Thomas Vivar, the representation of the enlightened order that the French want to impose. And of course, the enlightened order dies, as is their just deserts.
Yeah.
And though interestingly, there is the final words of Thomas Vivar is, "I don't want a priest to bury me." He dies, go to the grave with his beliefs, which it is nice because people who were believers in the French Revolution were true believers. Napoleon was a true believer. As for all of his ego of his own ego over sort of personal glory, he was a true believer in the French Revolution. That has motivated him as much as anything else to sort of go to it. And that's true of people who are in lesser positions of power, like Thomas Vivar would have been. So it's nice to see that sort of commitment to the end shown on screen.
Definitely, it's. I'm glad to highlight that they allow the French in this series to be entitled to their incorrect opinions.
And then the battle comes to an end when the banners St James's put out, and it does come to an end. Uprising and the French are defeated, and this is a French colonel is about, and so he has to go at Sharpe, and showing himself to be a thoroughgoing Frenchman and a gentleman. When Sharpe does not have a weapon, he pulls a pistol out, at which point Perkins shoots him, and rightly so.
Yes, quite safe. Very, very typical of the French to pull such doggish tactics. But what can you expect from a nation of caddish individuals like that?
And for this, Sharpe makes Perkins a chosen man, which is his a good rule.
Huzzah.
And so the series, the episode comes to an end where Sharpe sort of gives his account to Wellington about the situation with the Banner of St James, and then he shows that he has found the banker. And has got the banking draft with him. I should say that the actor playing this is James Rothschild, for those who don't know. He's a Canadian actor who's been in quite a few things. Kerry Shale. He's been in Doctor Who a couple of times. He's a really good actor. I've got to say, when I watched this, I had to remind myself he was Canadian because he's a very good accent.
Yes, certainly. Honestly, this is the first time remembering of him actually being Canadian. It's he pulls it off very convincingly, if I dare say, very convincingly.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting how Sharpe sort of works out how who he is. One, it's because of the type of tobacco he's smoking, which you can't get in Spain. Two, the fact that he refuses to eat, he turns down the opportunity to eat pork. And then the third one is him speaking Yiddish in the coach when he thought Sharpe was asleep. Sort of that. It also shows Sharpe's intelligence as well in that.
Yeah, it's quite safe. Yeah, he noticed.
Yeah. And so in this, Sharpe is sort of congratulated, and Hogan makes it quite clear that he will be of use in the future. And then the final scene is the one that becomes almost obligatory in the series from now on, which is the romance scene where he and Trader become an item, as it were.
Absolutely, they get very acquainted with each other,
and that sort of brings the episode to an end. And I've ever since I saw this decades ago now, I've really enjoyed it. And as I said earlier, when it comes to the issue, or when it comes to the budget, I think, at least in this case, given what they had, they did really well. So there's some of the later episodes when they got big battles, like the Charles Waterloo. I can see exactly the criticism there.
Yeah.
You're playing the Battle of Waterloo. It looks like you've just got a few reenactors.
Yeah, I'd heartily recommend, if you enjoy the character drama, watch Sharpe's Waterloo. If you want the battle, go watch Waterloo.
Yeah, which, as I said before, we will be reviewing at some point.
Huzzah!
And so that is the end of the slides. So as I say, overall, really enjoyable. As an introduction to the character in the series, it does really well. You get a good sense of who Sharpe is and what he's going to be doing, and also the era in which he's in. Overall.
Yes, certainly. It really, well, it's, as you said, sets up the character incredibly well, sets up the motivation incredibly well. I think it's and it really focuses that while there are other aspects to this story and this war, it is ultimately at the heart of it a character drama, which I think is it knows. I think that's the success of what Sharpe is. I think it's the success of the series, etc. Is it knows what it is, and it doesn't stray away from what it's. Would it be nice if there were much bigger set pieces? Absolutely, of course there would, but it doesn't. The fact there are none does not detract from the overall story.
Yeah.
I think most people agree that, well, as we'll find out, that a lot of the scenes are the ones with the fewest people present, etc., and where the actors are really allowed to shine with the material they have.
Yeah. And just to sort of do a bit of comparison with the book, I've got to say that whilst there are obviously changes to it, like the fact that the book is set in the aftermath of the Battle of the retreat from Corunna, and the reason why Sharpe's there are different, the fundamental story stays the same, and it does that reasonably well. And also the changes it makes, for example, the looking for Jane Rothschild is not in the original book, but it fits reasonably well into the plot of the TV series, and the sort of changes that we mentioned before, the fact that Sharpe is in the TV series a Yorkshireman, and he becomes from being a Londoner in the books. Those changes sort of these do sort of you can sort of, if you're a fan of the books, you can sort of you can more than easily live with them.
Absolutely, and it's just I think the best thing is the deviations from the books, the creative choices. They're not made for horrifically bad reasons. A lot of it's purely practicality, like as we've highlighted with the budget and such already. Largely, and Sharpe becoming a Yorkshireman as well, obviously, because Sean Bean was just like, no. But they were, I think we all would have had a much more difficult time had Sean Bean been feigning an accent for the entire time of it. I think, it's, I mean, as we've said, this is where Sharpe really shines, is in its characters, in what it portrays, and I think it makes up for a lot of the shortfallings. Like as you've highlighted, the budget criticism is a big one, but ultimately, studio really can't do much about that, can it? Yeah. And it's, I think, we all would have been rather more disappointed had we seen, especially in the of the era, had we seen CGI and that sort of thing dominating the screen. I think it took all the source material, and it was possibly, I think, to this day, one of the best examples of transferring one medium to another and pulling it off very successfully well. I don't know about your contention on the matter, Mr. Hook.
I think they did reasonably well, with the one exception of Sharpe's Gold, which for years I wondered what the writer was on who did that, and then I for once actually decided to sit down and watch it and then read who the writer was, and then I saw the name Nigel Neal and I thought, okay, no, it wasn't on anything, that was just Nigel Neal.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Which, for those who don't know, that when we come to talk about that episode, it's going to be it's a strange one. It has very little in common with the book, but it is actually quite enjoyable for all of its intense strangeness.
Yes, and there is a lot of intense strangeness. Be under no false impression, ladies and gentlemen, and we will be coming to it. I assure you of that.
Yeah.
But no, it's ultimately, I think, quite nicely rounded, quite clear cut, and I think that's the good thing with each of them, is it does well in regards to the books as well. Ultimately it's part of a much larger narrative, etc. But you can neatly wrap up the episodes individually. They stand on their own merit as their own episodes.
Yeah. That's one thing I'm thinking about it now. I think Sharpe is one of the few series where you can watch it out of order, and I don't think you'd be overly, much difficulty in working out what's going on.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. They work fantastically as standalone type things, which I think is to its credit, largely to its credit, and I think as well. One of the other things I think it does is, rather than it's as much an homage to the books as anything else, and generates people reading the books ultimately. Like you hear the amount of people who watch the Sharpe series, and maybe they're not the most prolific readers on planet Earth, but they'll watch a Sharpe episode and think, well, maybe I'll give the book a go and such. It's very, very good in that regard. It reminds me very much of sort of the Harry Potter movies in that sort of way. That it generates more interest for the source material and the time period ultimately. I mean, I'm probably one of the prime examples of it, must be said. But so many people, it really, I'd say, Sharpe helped, do the sort of 90s rebirth of reenactment, especially for the time period. I'd say, you think about it, and you look at some of the actors, like Daniel Hagman's actor. He used the Sharpe series to, better go around doing his folk singing at reenactment things and such like that. And I think, it generally, I'd be interested to see the experience filming Sharpe that was previously mentioned by that gentleman. I think that's something I ought to look into, because all in all, I think it's quite a positive series in that front.
Yeah. And I've got to say, just on terms of where they filmed it, as I say, most of it was filmed I believe, in the Ukraine and the Crimea. And I didn't know that for many years, so it looks, to my mind, what Spain would look like.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Especially in the final ones.
Yeah.
When I was told, in especially the final parts of the episode, when when I was told, oh yes, that was filmed in the Ukraine and the Crimea, I was like, really? it looks very much like the peninsula. Location scouts definitely need a raise on that one, let me tell you.
Yeah, that always I'm going to saying that, it always reminds me of there's a film called A Hill in Korea, which is about the British Army in the Korean War, and Michael Caine has a small part in that. And because Michael Caine served in the Korean War, he also had the advice. He was at the unofficial position of military advisor. And he said they filmed it in Portugal. And he said that they'd be better off filming it in North Wales, because that's what Korea looks like.
Yeah.
He said that, he didn't want to mention that because he wanted to see what Portugal was like.
Oh God, you have to love Sir Michael Caine. Oh goodness me! Yeah, shame we can't get any actors from the time period to advise on Sharpe. We have books, I suppose. There is always that, but it's I did hear rumors supposedly that Netflix were thinking about remaking Sharpe. So I hear. I don't know how true that is, and with it being Netflix, I equally don't think I trust them.
No. It's if they ever do a reboot of Sharpe or even Hornblower, I hope it's in about 10 years' time, when the film and TV industry on both sides of the Atlantic have finally got themselves sorted out.
Yes.
At the moment, it would be bloody awful.
No, completely. So I think it would be God, I can only imagine how much they'd blow up the character of Commandant Teresa and such. I imagine that would become a pinnacle focus, and it's just, I would not, especially with the present films industry, the present films industry's shall we say, laissez-faire approach to historical accuracy and authenticity.
Yes, if anybody wants to know what Henry is referring to, gird yourself. Don't watch, if only for only clips of the recent Napoleon film, and you'll see what he means.
We don't talk about that here. That disgusting trope. God, it really does beg belief how you should have stick to filming sci-fi, but you can't win them all, I suppose.
What gets me about that is he was the one who did the Duelists.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not only the Duelist, he did a bloody Gladiator as well, and all of that. And granted, it wasn't it wasn't historically accurate, so to speak, but it was authentic.
Yeah.
And it's like, to go from that to they turned Napoleon into, as much as I hate to admit the thing I should say about the Napoleon film, it got me as a steadfast Englishman to feel sympathy for the French. That alone, I think it was who's the chap who directs it again? I can never remember his name.
Ridley Scott.
Yes, Ridley Scott. He owes me an apology letter for making me feel that. He owes me one.
Yes. That I should say, ladies and gentlemen, that's the film we will not be covering on Officer's Miss.
Quite so. We focus on historically authentic movies here, not tripe.
So I think at this point, given we just got over the 2 hours, we bring things to sort of an end. And just to mention now that next time we do this, I'm not sure when, after we finish, me and Henry will talk about that, but we'll be doing the next episode of Sharpe, which is Sharpe's Eagle, which has a very particular scene that both me and Henry are very fond of.
Yes, incredibly fond of. It's a core memory and a core tendency of my my command of the First Royal Marines, it must be said.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will say goodbye, and myself and Henry will see you at some point soon.
I'll be changing into my tank uniform and going to get absolutely destroyed on War Thunder, so this will be fun.
Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I say goodbye.
Cheerio.